Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to be progressing with our 1960 Bohlins Ridermatic, and today we're going to be starting the rebuild of the Versamatic system. Now I say starting because this will probably take more than one day to do and therefore be in more than one video. We have all of the parts we need laid out on the bench here, and there's going to be a lot of cleaning up needing doing on all of these parts. They're all quite oily, except for a couple of them which we cleaned up in advance, specifically this one, because in preparation for this video we cleaned this up and the shaft bit on here to make sure that there was no wear between this mounting bracket and this part of the Versamatic system, and there isn't, thankfully, because there's no bushings or bearings in there, so that would have been a drill out and put new bushings in there. But since there's no wear in these parts, there's no reason to do that. And we also cleaned this up for another reason, which I'll get onto in a bit. Now there's a number of jobs that need doing on all of these parts. We need to put new bearings in this Versamatic pulley, while being mindful that that part is probably asbestos, so don't crunch it or anything. As I said, there's a lot of cleaning up to do. These belts, while they're not massively cracked, have kind of assumed shape, so we'll put new ones of those on. Now, while this Versamatic lever does move as it should do, we're still going to take this apart and clean it all up so that it's as smooth as possible on there. It's a non-standard fuel tank, as I think we've said before, so this needs taking off and replacing with a proper one. Now, we do have some parts to do or to help us with this. As you can see, new belts here to replace those two, bearings for the Versamatic pulley, and a new replacement fuel tank, which we're very happy with, and that looks to be the perfect size to go on there. So those are the parts we've got, but first a bit of a little story about one of the reasons why we cleaned this up. Now, during the week, this tractor actually became quite well travelled because we put the back seats down in the Land Rover, put this in the back, and took it to a local paint supplier, and they used their scanning camera on this part of the chassis. We cleaned this up as kind of like a second paint match thing, but they thought this was a better area to draw a match from. And we got some paint mixed up of the earlier Ridermatic green that was on the 1960 Ridermatic. And the reason for that is because we don't want to leave this fuel tank in grey, really. So we thought we'd better paint it up in green, and then that'll be the original colour. And in future, if we paint up any Ridermatic attachments in green, or when we come to do the other Ridermatic chassis, if we do a full restoration on that, we still have the green colour, assuming that it looks okay on the fuel tank. We've moved some stuff to one side now, and the first thing that will go on is this cast Versamatic bracket. Now, there's 3 bolts for this, 2 of which are the same size, they go in there and there. Then there's this bolt which is longer, which goes in here. The reason it's longer is because this bracket goes on to this hole too, and then that attaches onto the dash tower. However, we're going to hold off on putting this on for the moment because the other end of it mounts to the same place as the fuel tank bracket, so we'll bolt both of those things on at the same time. Now for these bolts, we've got new spring washers, and we've also got some washers. It didn't originally have washers on them, but we're going to put them on anyway, and we put a new grease nipple on there already. So we'll just take this over here, roughly line this up on the chassis, and just drop in these bolts. I won't do up the longer one that bracket that I showed you goes into. For the moment, I'll just drop it in and loosely do it up. The other two I can do up tightly, and we'll be back with you in just a second. The next thing we're going to do is dismantle the fuel tank and Versamatic lever part so that we can start to clean it up, and so that we're in the right position to put a new fuel tank on and then reassemble everything afterwards. So to undo these 4 bolts holding on the fuel tank bracings, we've put releasing agent on these for months before starting this project, and a bit more now. I'm going to use an adjustable spanner on the brace parts just to kind of support it, because we don't want to bend them at all. And when it comes to these threads, we're going to have to reuse them. So I'm going to make sure that, okay, the ratchet isn't going to work on there. So I'm going to make sure as I undo this, I kind of go backwards and forwards a bit to clean out the thread as I go, so that we can reuse this again, and to make sure that we're not damaging any of the thread either. So now this first one is off. I'll just repeat that on the other 3, and then we can detach the fuel tank. We have everything apart now. So we've got the 2 brackets, and we're very happy with how easily they came off. And they're in decent condition, so that's good too. Free firewood, which is always good. Don't usually get that with your tractors. And the fuel tank, which is still full of horrible stuff, and we're not going to open that up through fear of the smell. We've already made that mistake earlier in this project, so we're not going to make it again. But what we're going to do now is take this Versamatic lever off of the mounting bracket. Now the first thing to do is take off this split pin, which we've already started taking off camera. Just the last bit to do with the pliers here. There we are. These old split pins are usually a bit bent, so they can be quite difficult to get off. Put the washer with that there. And then it is just 2 bolts here, which I'm not sure how tight I was expecting those to be, but weren't too bad actually. So I'll now just finish taking these off camera and come back to you in a second with these 2 as 2 separate parts. We've now got the 2 pieces apart, and we've spent quite a while cleaning this up, while we're thinking about how we're going to solve a couple of problems that we found. Now this lever obviously mounted on there with this going through here, but when we took this off, you might be able to see it under the light here. You can see there's quite a big lip on that bit of the bar there from where it's worn down, which is seriously bad. That's what would have been causing the movement in there. So we'd like to do something about that, which will probably mean welding it up and then using a file to make the round profile again. Ideally, you would just chuck that in the lathe after you've welded it and take it down like that. But there's no chance we're mounting this whole kind of component in the lathe. Unfortunately, this is about as stripped down as this gets, or almost. But yeah, that would be very difficult or impossible to mount in the lathe, so files it will have to be for that. And it wasn't just that piece that's worn. If you look at that, the hole in there is no longer circle, it's more of an oval. And fixing that is easier. You just drill that out to a slightly bigger size and put a flange bushing in there, which is what we're planning on doing. Obviously, we don't have that bushing with us at the moment because we didn't kind of foresee this issue. So we've ordered one of those now. And the advantage of a flange bushing is it gives a bigger surface area that this bar is going into. So it'll be partly on the previously worn bit, partly not. Obviously, once we fix this, this should all be nice and smooth, but it means that in future it'll take longer to wear down, and it'll be the bushing that wears down, not this part or this part either. So it just makes it a more sustainable thing to have on your tractor. Now, the other thing we noticed is about the roll pin in here, which is the next stage, is taking that roll pin out, because we'd like to take this all apart, get to the spring, clean all of this mechanism up so that that all moves nice and smoothly, which it does already, but we want it to be as good as possible. The other reason being that if I turn this over, you can see the roll pin has worn through there, so it is definitely in need of a replacement. So we will hit this roll pin out and come back to you in just a second. We've tapped the roll pin out now, and you can just see how worn it is. You can try and look at the side profile there. You can tell which bit hasn't been worn down at all. But the drift is still in where the roll pin was, so I'm going to push the button in on this and just wiggle the drift out. Now, in theory, if I let go of this, this end part should come out like so. There we are. If I tip this up, the spring should be free to come out. Might need a bit of levering. Might take a minute to get this moving, but eventually this should be able to come out the same hole as the rest of that bar. The spring took some persuasion, but we got it out in the end, and we've cleaned up all of the parts, the spring, this rod, and the end part, and all of the other bits and pieces here. We do have a replacement roll pin, but we're not going to put that on yet, because that would mean putting the spring in, reassembling it all, and we're a tiny bit worried about when we're welding this up, possible heat transfer going to the spring, making it less effective and stuff like that. So we're going to wait to reassemble this for once we've done that welding, and we can't do that welding until we've put the new flange bushing into the fuel tank bracket part, so that we can make sure when we're filing down our welds that they fit perfectly with the bushing. However, seeing as we've managed to pull this apart and completely clean up these parts, it's a good step forward from if we flash back all the way to the start of the project, where we had to completely spray this with a releasing agent because it was seized solid. So, good indicator of progress. But having cleaned up all of those parts, we started to look at what we could actually do now from the rest of our parts. Now, these two fuel tank braces are going to have to wait until the fuel tank is painted, which will only really happen after the bushings and welding stuff is done. Then we have this big part with the Versamatic pulley and belt tensioner and stuff like that on it. Now, there's two connections that this has, well, three connections technically. This one here goes to the Versamatic lever, so obviously that's going to have to wait until these parts are done. This bracket here attaches to a spring that goes to the engine, and seeing as the engine's going in after this, This means that this part, out of all of the bits here, is going to be the last on. Now that third point is a bolt hole where that attaches to the brake pedal, which we can actually put on at the moment because you can take that bolt off and put that on afterwards. So we're going to attach this while we can. We have cleaned this up and quickly oiled the contact surfaces. We've got a couple of new spring washers there. So what I will do is use the fact that once the spring gets past half extension, it locks into place, and just put no limbs near that kind of opening part. And if we go over to the tractor here, okay, that might be more challenging than I thought actually. I'm going to have to hold this spring in place, but I'll put the bolts through first. So this might be a two-person job actually, so we'll come back to you in a minute with one of us holding the brake pedal open and the other one doing up the nuts and spring washers. We've got the brake pedal on now. Fiddly little thing to fasten up, but that all works nicely now. And in this video there hasn't been much change on the chassis here, but at least we've got a couple of bits on now. And we're kind of at a standstill for today, but when that bushing arrives, I'm sure we can crack on with some of these other issues, and we can make a lot of progress the next time that we are in here. But that is it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.